Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
I'll talk to you guys about what we think of as a deep science tech venture, and how we think these these companies grow and scale, and how a fund like us can play a role as a partner there. So I'll start off with just setting a bit of context about us and about our activities, our history, and so on. We are early stage investors across the spectrum. Yeah, so deep science or deep tech is not the only thing we do, but it is a sizable part of our activities and our portfolio. So we come in early, we've been around for over 10 years, and we like to be the first institutional partner to an early stage tech startup with very much an India focus. So about half or slightly more than half of our portfolio is digital tech startups, which I guess you can call more akin to the usual playbook of Indian VC investing, where you're investing into asset light digital AI based or app based models revolutionizing legacy businesses. And while that is exciting, and while we think there is still a significant opportunity for us there, that's not what I'll be talking about here today. I'll be talking about the other part of our investing, which is R&D driven or IP led deep science ventures, which of course you guys have had significant exposure to over the last week or 10 days. Deep science and deep tech, we already have a significant portfolio in this space. We've been, as I said, investing over the years, and I'll spend the last part of the session talking about learnings from some of these investments. So I'll not spend too much time here just to promote us, but we have invested in this across sectors for a while now. And of course, if you have any questions at any time, just feel free to pause me. Uh, I don't have too much content, so I'm happy to keep this as interactive as possible. So a lot of what I'm talking about today is coming from a report that we launched last year. And the other reason I wanted to talk about the report is because one part of our activities is to invest into deep science and deep tech companies. The other is that we've recognized the siloed nature of the ecosystem, and there has been a significant amount of positive movement there. But even now, we feel like, for example, scientists and maybe their 2B CBOs or CEOs don't necessarily talk, or even a startup that is looking to commercialize isn't able to talk very well with an Indian corporate or some sort of conglomerate group that is looking, there is a potential for a pilot for being a first customer. And similarly, there's a lot of people who should be talking to each other to make these ventures possible, and when possible to grow faster, and they don't. Description also holds to us as VCs. I think we also need to educate ourselves on why this style of investing or investing into this type of company is different from what we consider normal style of investing. And therefore, with all of these kind of gaps that we've identified, we've tried to put together not just our investment activities but also some ecosystem initiatives. So there is an annual event we do called the Deep Science Forum that will happen in November later this year. I unfortunately didn't put details on the slide, but I can circulate that information later. Would be great to have you guys there. And apart from that, there is this annual report we launched the first time last year. We'll be launching again later this year as part of our event. The report, since it was the first of a kind, cataloged the landscape of deep science tech innovation in India. Why are people excited by it? Why are we excited by it? What are some of the nuances here? What are the technology areas that are driving this kind of techno-commercial innovation? And the reports on our website, or if you email me, I'm happy to send it to you. Part of the talk that I'm going to give is adapted from parts of the report. So then I'll move into, again, the talk itself. What is deep science tech, or what do we consider as deep science tech? And I know everyone has different definitions of it. And there are different terms as well: deep science, deep tech, hard tech, and so on. But we really like this framework that's coming from a book or a concept called Pasture's Quadrant. It's by somebody called Donald Stokes. This is actually pretty old, this framework, and his or this theory's mm point is that there are two kind of slightly unrelated ways of thinking of scientific advancement. One is pure quest for just fundamentally understanding physics or chemistry at that base level, and the other is trying to develop technologies, applications that are pertinent to a problem that somebody is talking about today. or maybe in 5 years' time. When these two things come together, when there is kind of a fundamental R&D shift or a fundamental technological innovation that also ties into an urgent problem, then that's exciting, and that's what we consider as deep science tech. And that kind of tracks with a lot of the recent or a lot of the wave of deep tech we've seen in the last, let's say, 30, 50 years. A lot of it has been like that. Let's say, I'll talk about a couple of examples like transistors, lithium ion batteries. All of them are fundamental innovations, but they've also been timed right, where the world or the yeah, the world has essentially been ready to use these to solve some of the problems that they've been facing. So whether it's, new diagnostic technologies for pandemics or cancer or whatever, whether it's batteries and other clean technologies for energy transition and so on, where the uh, where the pertinence to immediate application is there, that's what makes it exciting. And that also means that there is an element of timing to it, and that adds you already see here that the commercials, tying into the commercials of the world, or thinking about the commercial implications of the technology or how best to leverage it, is important from kind of the get-go when you're trying to commercialize however transformative your technology is. What is and why is it so exciting, and why are deep tech solutions so exciting? We're not the only VC in India looking to do deep tech investing. There are others, and I think you'll be hearing from more as well in this course. All of us and deep tech investors around the world are excited because there is a potential that a new technology platform is created that not only solves the problems of the next 3 years or 5 years, but serves as a platform for the next 50 years. And some of these examples here, transistors were invented in 19, I think 55. The Nobel Prize was given a bit later than that. And since then, that piece of technology has been like, we don't talk about transistors anymore, but it has been abstracted away, and it has served as the base for so many new layers of computational technology. So transistors, I guess, is the poster child for deep tech, where it is a transformative technology, so advanced that it deserved a Nobel Prize, but also so pertinent to real world applications that it was commercialized faster than possibly any other technology at its time. Similarly, lithium ion batteries, the lithium intercalation chemistries were developed in the 70s, 80s, 90s, mostly in the US. And while there was a lot of transformative work, again, from an investor or from a deep tech perspective, it really took off when the batteries got stabilized enough, the prices fell enough, and there was market demand from various use cases in energy transition, whether it's energy storage, electric mobility, and so on, for it to take off. So in the 90s, you could say, hey, lithium ion batteries are a really cool technology. Would you invest? And I would perhaps say not really, because I think beyond iPods and laptops, I don't see too much of a market. But today our thinking is very different. When you ask somebody to do a market sizing of lithium ion batteries, consumer electronics is less than 5% of it, even though that's what it first uh, you know got commercialized into. The other point I want to highlight is, again, it's created a platform of storage, it's created a platform of electric mobility, on top of which other now new next gen technologies will be built. These don't have to be deep tech, of course. You could talk about new ways of financing electric vehicles, which people haven't yet figured out the right way to price that. And that is something that is much downstream, enabled by a deep science or a deep tech innovation. Similarly, on the biotech side, something that we are really excited about is the rise of next generation sequencing, which has kind of created new, or let me put it another way. If 20 years ago you wanted to sequence a genome, you couldn't. Maybe 10 years ago you could, and it was about uh, probably $10,000, $20,000 at minimum. So you could never say that I want to build a product on top of a sequenced genome. But now, next gen sequencing is at $500,000, plummeting even more. It means that it can become just a component of your workflow. It can become a component of a cancer test. It can become a component of agricultural research or something like that. And that uh, that fall in price is, so again, just want to clarify, there are two things. One is that the concept of NGS as a technology is very interesting, and that is a deep tech innovation. On the other hand, the acceleration or the cost reduction of such a technology platform begets further innovation on top of it. And it creates new pathways, new workflows, new products that you couldn't have imagined when the product was first developed. And I think what's useful for us, at least as an investor, is to think about what's happening right now that we say, hey, this is way too expensive. This is never going to become part of my daily workflow. And then we just have to be prepared to be surprised and proven wrong maybe 10 years later when something like whatever that technology is just too cheap and we use it every day. Obviously, people do talk about AI and LLMs being one of the candidates for that, but I'm also optimistic about other platforms like, hopefully we have renewable energy and storage so cheap that, people talk about energy too cheap to meter. That's one example. And there will be new technology platforms that are being developed right now that are going to result in such shifts. So what that's what I was talking about, that the acceleration kind of begets more acceleration. uh, Transistors, obviously, we know about Moore's law and about the increasing number of transistors per chip. How every time we've done that, we've unlocked new types of computation. We've unlocked the ability to put, uh, you know, to put basically to make anything smart. To make mics work, to make these dongles work, or even to put, like, the water purifier I use at my home has Bluetooth. It has different kinds of chips. It has water level detection chips. The transistors and electronics have gotten so cheap to enable that. Lithium ion batteries, again, there's something called a learning curve, which means that as cumulative manufacturing capacity goes up, the price significantly drops. And that, I think there's obviously a percentage, but that is called a learning curve. And learning curves for both solar panels and lithium ion batteries have made pretty, I would say, out there concept into something that is really going to play the key role in the energy transition, both in India and globally. Similarly, next generation sequencing, it's dropped about 25x in the last 12 years. Uh, and it's going to create new technology platforms. So that's what, as an investor, makes us really excited, that we have the opportunity to invest into technologies like this. And that's what we're always looking for. We're looking for not just technologies that change the way you do something, but technologies that create a new way of, or create new things entirely, or create new ways of thinking to create new building blocks for the technologies of tomorrow. So fundamentally, that's what we're looking for. Obviously, if we had any investor, if they had invested in companies that were developing these things at the very beginning, they would probably be set. These are, I would say, the star examples or the highlight examples. But that is kind of what we are looking for, and that is why it's very exciting, because markets are large, the scope is global, and the more differentiated the technology, obviously the harder it is to control, but also it means the better you can defend it. So right now, I think what we are focusing on, and this will change with time, what we called out in the report is that there are four key technology areas where we see a lot of innovation happening and where we are looking to focus on. So these are the four technology areas, and why we're going after this, or why we're choosing to think this way rather than talking about the final application areas, is we think that the technologies are generally applicable across sectors. So that's why we're not, you can see here, I'm not talking about things like healthcare or things like climate. We believe that these four pillars of technology are going to address the most urgent problems in each of the downstream sectors, whether it's, agriculture, climate, space tech, manufacturing, semiconductors, and so on. We've so far invested, I would say, in two or three of these buckets. We aim to, by the end of the current fund that we're deploying, to be in all four buckets for sure. But what combines all of them is the fact that there are kind of underlying science advances that are making new and new innovations possible. So obviously with AI, I think all of us are very familiar with, I would say, every 3 or 5 years, there's kind of a keystone paper. So whether it's, generative adversarial networks in 2014, or the transformer paper in 2017, and newer things coming up right now, there are new base level, there are new kind of extreme, there are new very transformative technologies coming up. Similarly, with synthetic biology and biotechnology, things like next generation sequencing, things like CRISPR, these are serving as the technology platforms for today. With advanced materials, electronics, I think there has been a lot of new materials discovery that has also been powered by the rise of databases and AI, uh, that are just creating new things, that are making new things possible. Similarly, what ties in is that on the kind of, I would say, on the demand side, is that all of these technologies have the potential to solve globally relevant problems. So, biotech, say vaccines for pandemics, we need advanced materials for better solar cells, for better batteries, for better composites, lightweight materials and so on. There are a lot of large markets, 10 billion or even 100 billion plus in size, that are always looking to research to get them solutions that they need in the future. So I think post this, I'll spend the bulk of my time on the next couple of slides. This is the part of this is the journey part of the talk, and I think this is where, as a VC as well, we are probably going to be able to give you guys, or give the ecosystem, the most value, because we are in a bit of a unique position to understand and to participate in such a kind of conversation. The other stuff is just landscaping. It's not, I'm not telling you something that you didn't know. It is something you could find online. But I think some of this, along with our real world experience, is what is kind of pivotal, or something unique that we can offer. Yeah, so deep science tech companies are very different from, I would say, digital or software companies. And that's the reason I'm contrasting them, is just because for us, those are the two pillars of investments that we look at. And I'll walk you through this. But for us, the way, in the end, our duty is, as an investor, to make money, and we are going to look for opportunities that can get us returns that make the risk worth it. So whether it happens through a digital startup or a deep science or a deep tech startup, doesn't matter too much to us. If I take a really like zoomed out cold view of it, the reason we have this is just to have different frameworks in our head to say that, hey, if a company falls under this bucket, this is how we need to be thinking about it, and if it falls under this bucket, this is the other way we think about it. So for a digital company, we're not talking too much about grants. We're talking about building a product. It doesn't take as much money, it doesn't take as much time, and then immediately interfacing with customers, raising money to fuel growth, and finding that product market fit at some point in this journey. And obviously it's more of a process than an end goal itself. So this is I would say, India has seen a lot of this journey play out on the left hand side, where we've had companies come in, small team, raise a pre-seed, build a product, and then iterate on the product again and again until you're maybe at series A or a series B scale, and then decide, I have something that's mature and I really want to scale it up. And if you take companies like Swiggy, Zomato, uh, I don't know, bunch of them, even Ola, for example, they fit into this bucket, where there's not much to be proved before you build the product itself, right? It's the product that does the talking. On the other hand, for a deep science tech company, the product is just kind of the manifestation of the technology. The product is not too difficult to think about. Like, it may be difficult to explain, but it's not too difficult to think about. Because if, let's say, I'm a vaccine company, I have a lot of fancy underlying, let's say, mRNA technology on the back end. But if I come to the market and say, I have developed a vaccine for this cancer, it's very easy to explain. But the work in the background that takes place before that is pretty immense. So the major difference between digital and a deep science tech company is that the two major differences are that, a lot of the initial work is very inward focused. For a deep tech company, it's a lot of R&D. It's working with a small team, it's working in a lab, and it's not necessarily interfacing with a customer as yet. On the other hand, the other major difference is that revenues don't kick in early. Revenues are not the way for early stage adopters or investors or other stakeholders to value or judge the quality of the technology that a deep tech company is creating. And therefore, even here you're talking about early revenue at the seed stage for a digital tech company, whereas for a deep tech company, it's really at series B when you even think about revenue. Until that point, you're probably just thinking about pilots, probably thinking about something just building up an order book. So here, the end conclusion of this is that if I can't judge, or if I can't value as an investor, if I can't judge or value a startup by its revenue or by any kind of financial metrics, then what do I use to do that? How do I along with the investors before me, along with the investors after me, come up with a common framework to understand how to value a deep tech company. Because many times, you go to a kind of, maybe let's say, older school financial investor and you say, hey, can you, and this has happened to us a lot of times, we have a company, we invested at the seed stage, they've made significant amount of progress since then. We go say, hey, can you guys invest at XYZ valuation? The company is still pre-product, or sorry, still pre-revenue, they're setting up a plant, they've got their patents, they've done this, and they have, they've got good feedback from industry partners that they want to buy this product. An older school financial investor may not even touch such an opportunity because it does not fall into the framework of that's the revenue, that's the growth, this is the kind of multiple I would give this sort of company, and therefore I'm happy to invest. Other members of the ecosystem in a way that helps them also make sense of why you should, why these companies, obviously they need money until they start growing, but why does it make sense to invest in such a company, even without kind of the usual suspects of financial metrics. So that really brings me to the crux of what I want to talk about, which is the de-risking journey of a deep tech startup. What we think of as a deep tech startup, so the end goal obviously is to get here, is to make money. Because you have IP, because you have a defensible technology, you can make a smaller revenue at a much higher margin and therefore attract a pretty decent valuation. And since you're again targeting a large market, all of that is fine. But to get here, to get from R&D to growth, there are so many risks in the journey that have to be de-risked. And these involve different types of risks themselves than the ones on the left hand side. And so our job as kind of, I won't say the word custodian, but as our job as a partner, or our job as a kind of member of this ecosystem, is to quantify those risks, whether they're R&D risks, science risks, engineering risks, product risks, and so on. And then make sure that in any story of a deep tech company, we're very clearly quantifying when this major thing gets de-risked, the company has created value and the company is should be valued at this point. And it also gives, a set of milestones for any of these ventures to target and to hit before they can start getting valued on revenue numbers. In our experience, we always try, or we always think about, fundraising rounds or significant milestones in 18-24 months. And the when we come in with, let's say, $1 million, $2 million at best. That's not enough money to set up a plant. So you're just doing small scale manufacturing, you're interfacing with customers, you raise more money to set up your pilot plant, post which, so maybe let's say 3.5, 4 years after we invest, there is some revenue coming in, but again, not at the unit economics that are great. It's not a scaled up plant. But at that point, for us, we're happy because the tech is de-risked, the first manufacturing line has been set up, so that part has been de-risked, and we're at a stage where things can just be replicated. So that's about 4 years from when we invest. We typically try to stay invested 6 to 8, sometimes a little longer than that, years. So it is at the very end of our partnership with the company as well that, serious revenues kick in. I don't think we're pushing for that to happen faster. I don't think that's the right way to go, because when that has happened, I think there are some examples even in the Indian ecosystem where the push for early revenues means you are trying to commercialize a technology that's maybe not as differentiated. You choose something else that is in your kind of stable of technologies, and you end up competing in a very different kind of market that's not your core. That's not where your core. That's not leveraging your core strength. But yeah, so generally, I would say it does take 3-4 years for revenues to kick in, even modest ones, and possibly another 2 years for sizable revenues to start taking place. I'll obviously, so average, so it can be different. If it is a AI company, I think we have very different expectations. It doesn't take much to build that. You're not, actually, maybe we should, but you're not talking too much about certification, regulation, and so on. We want that to we want the revenue to kick in much faster. Whereas, let's say it's a battery tech company with a new chemistry altogether, which we do have in our portfolio, we've realized that it takes time just to set up a plant, because you don't even, the machines that you need to build the battery at scale don't exist. So it takes you 6 months just to design those machines, for example. And so, yeah, so for some technologies, it does take a much longer time. So I'll walk, as we go on in the next couple of slides, on from the left to the right, we'll talk about just the TRL levels and the other types of milestones that a company is going to hit in parallel to orchestrate that journey. So typically TRL 1, 2, 3, we feel like it's, in our opinion, it is definitely a science problem or or an R&D problem at that stage. The researchers are probably not even set up a company at this point, and the risk involved is science risk. So that means the first thing that you need to do to show that, to get to the next level, is to at least is to make sure your science at least works at a tabletop level, at a bench level, or at a lab scale. At that point, you're doing obviously fundamental research, and maybe you might start thinking about translational research towards towards a commercialized product. And at this point, you may not even have angel funding, but you are probably looking at grants. And towards the end of the journey, if you're incubating or if you're incorporating a company, maybe something from an incubator like where we are itself. So this is the part of the journey where we like to talk to entrepreneurs, and many of the entrepreneurs in this stage are even not yet entrepreneurs; they are thinking about entrepreneurship. So while we cannot directly engage in terms of an investment consideration at this stage, it is still a stage that we like to talk to entrepreneurs and uh, get a sense of how they're thinking of their vision. Now, 4 and 5 is really the core part for us, the core period where we like to engage a lot more with deep science and deep tech entrepreneurs. At this point, we think of the science risk graduating or mixing in with the engineering risk. So typically, for us at least, when you've crossed TRL3, it means your science works. Now, it may not work at scale, it may not be cost effective, it may be it may be using hard to find materials and so on, but it works. You have found a way to show the efficacy of your tech in a lab. So if it's a battery chemistry, you use it, you discharge your battery, and you light up a bulb. That's the point where we want to be. And so the kind of core science is done, even though there will be fine tuning of it left. So at that point, the science de-risking of the company is kind of mm, merging into the engineering de-risking of the company. So what's the form factor this needs to be in, or can you make this work in the conditions it needs to work at? Can you replace some of the more expensive components with more abundant materials and so on? And you start thinking about things like product creation and and pilots. So this is where I would say the key thing here between 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5 is that in 1, 2, 3 you don't really need to interface with the outside world too much. Maybe you apply for grants, you apply for incubation, but you're not yet talking to customers because things are not yet ready. However, at 4, 5, when the science is de-risked, that's the sign that you also have the confidence, or the entrepreneur has the confidence to say, I have something that's ready to meet the real world in some form. And therefore you're talking about creating a product. So you're again, depending on the technology, whether it's a vaccine, whether it's a battery, whether it's a kind of semiconductor chip for AI, you're starting to think about the product, and you're starting to think about pilots. And both of these require you to interface with either a customer or a partner, or somebody who's going to be able to provide some third party credibility or testing for your product. So that's the exciting time for us. This is where, again, I've said that this is probably where companies do raise seed funding. And this is where we feel most comfortable engaging with entrepreneurs from a fundraising perspective. We obviously like to talk to anybody, even at this stage. If anyone's thinking about translational research, we love to talk to them. But the key for us from an investment perspective, we really want to see an initial product kind of ready, and we want to see uh, early conversations with customers. So again, maybe at the end of the talk, I'll talk about some of the learnings from our portfolio and the stages we came in at for some of them. Finally, obviously, as you keep moving, we like to call ourselves we think of ourselves as a good partner to a VC, to a deep tech company between, let's say, TRL 4 to 6 or 5 to 7. We think we're the right partner to not handhold, but be the good support in that journey. And maybe in a bit, I'll also talk about what we bring beyond just the capital to take companies from here to there. So here, I think the science is fully done. The engineering is yet to be de-risked. So again, if I take the context of a battery chemistry company, I would say one of our portfolio companies is, I would say, a TRL7. They're setting up their first plant. So they've not yet de-risked the manufacturing line. They kind of expect it to work, but they've not actually yet done it. So that's pending for them. And once they do that, they're going to have, early manufacturing setup. They're going to be able to talk to regulators or certifiers and so on. And this is when, like you said, uh, we expect the first set of revenues to come in here. Modest revenues, but we do expect some revenues. Again, on the digital side of our investing, we think of early revenues as just a sense that somebody somewhere is willing to pay for this. So it is solving someone's problem. Similarly, here, we like to see some revenue to show that, yes, you are, even though your tech is not fully ready, it's not a TRL9, you are solving somebody's problem in maybe even a niche use case. And finally, at the very end, you've kind of de-risked everything. You've de-risked your science, you've de-risked your engineering, you've de-risked your manufacturing, and you have the kind of nuts and bolts in place to replicate what you have. So if you have the entire science de-risked, if you have one line in a plant, you know that you can scale this up. You know that you can multiply this assembly line by 10, and the challenges are going to be more on pricing, on scale, on supply chain, and so on. But the challenges are not on your tech. Your tech is completely de-risked, and that for us is what TRL9 means. And this is where we're talking about the funding also being Series B and onwards. So I'll spend a little bit of time on that row as well and what I mean by onwards. But before that, I'll talk about this point to this point and how a VC like us can be a good partner, or what ideally should a VC do beyond money to be a good partner from here to there, and why I think we also do part of that pretty well. So obviously you need money to do these things. You need money to set up, to hire people. You need money to do your first set of patent filings. You need money to do your first set of pilots. Ideally the pilots are paid, but sometimes they're not. But more than money, you need to start getting embedded into the ecosystem. You need to start uh, and you need to start being a bit smart about who to sell to. So let me take the example of one of our portfolio companies, Off Grid. Off Grid is a zinc based battery chemistry company, and they have a zinc bromide battery chemistry that is very different from a lithium based battery chemistry. Because of some of the advantages that their chemistry has, it's a much better alternative for stationary storage. So the energy density, that is the amount of energy you can pack into a weight of battery, is very poor. It's not it's not going to enter your car. That battery is never going to be good enough to enter your car. However, it has long life. It does not need ventilation or air cooling to be operational. It uses abundant materials that are pretty cheap. Because of those things, it's a very good candidate for stationary storage. When we invested, we thought that one of the best use cases for them is to do fast charging of cars. So you couple it with a solar panel. Obviously, when you do fast charging of a car, you need a grid upgrade, which can be expensive. Because off-grid batteries are capable of fast discharge rates, we thought that they will be the best thing to charge your car from. That's what the founders thought as well. But as time has gone on, we have not even talked about fast charging for the last 2 years, because other products have come in, other ways of commercializing their technology have come in, which have made a lot more sense. Similarly, they spent about a year trying out e-rickshaws. So they're based in Noida. Noida has a lot of rickshaws that run on lead acid batteries. Obviously, there are health concerns, and even from a cost perspective, lead acid batteries are not too great because you have to get them refurbished every sometimes at best every 3 years. Off-grid batteries worked pretty well, and they were again excited about commercializing because that's a pretty big market just in the NCR and surrounding UP, Punjab, Haryana states. They thought they could solve for last mile mobility there. Spent a year, again realized that it's just not working out, and we need to focus on the largest market available here, even though it's a bit hard to get to, which is grid scale and industrial scale stationary energy storage. In that process, because we were really the only active institutional investor with them, we were like their chief strategy officer. So every month or every week, we would debrief and be like, you guys know the tech, so we have no questions about the tech, and that we ultimately trust on you. But on these points, we played a pretty key role in discussing with the company, doing some sort of modeling, doing some sort of excels, introducing them to players in the energy space in India to kind of iterate on this thought process, and finally come to the decision that that's the product form factor that you need. In this time, we were not able to contribute much on the tech, on the IP. That obviously the company with two PhDs as co-founders is able to do well on their own, but we're able to do a very good job in getting to, what is the right product, what is the right pilot, what is the first order. That kind of back and forth is what a VC is good at. I think we have good perches in the ecosystem, in the sense that we can sit in places and open doors for people, and that's again what we did for them. And similarly, that's what we do for all of our companies. We have a diagnostics company that was really struggling with figuring out how to do clinical trials for their shrimp infectious disease product. That again, we facilitated for them. We made a bunch of introductions both to hospitals and to kind of backwater research facilities, and we kind of facilitated their clinical trial, which is obviously a key step in any medical diagnostic tool. So that is what a VC offers, more than beyond just the capital. And as a VC gets more entrenched, like we are slowly, and there are a few other notable fund houses in India, they kind of become a center of gravity by themselves. They have large enough portfolios that their portfolio companies start working together. They have large enough brands that they are able to open doors for their portfolio companies. When we started out, we relied on some of our high profile companies to open doors for us. But I think as the time has gone on, as we have become bigger and more well known, we've been able to open more and more doors. And so I'm sure that, we're operating out of our third fund now. In our fourth and our fifth fund, when our deep tech portfolio slide has 20 names and not just 7 names, we will be able to help the 21st person a lot more, just because of our brand. And I know that sounds a little overconfident, but for better or worse, I think VCs have taken up a lot of mind space in the way startups are to be built and funded. And I think, at least for us, as we build out our brand, our startups will be able to benefit more from that. But overall, yes, there is a lot that VCs can do and will do beyond just the money. The last thing I want to talk about is that Series B and onwards piece at the bottom right. So until, obviously grants are not dilutive. Grants are just money that you take, and every other type of investment here is a equity investment. So whether it's the small amount of money, a small amount of stake that an incubator takes, whether it's angels, whether it's institutions like us, that like to take 10% or more than 10% of the company as our holding, until the point of, I would say, TRL 7, 8, or even 9, you're not really able to leverage other forms of capital. If you're in a strategic space or in a space of national or some kind of interest, there are other larger grants that you might take. So if you guys have heard about, let's say, the design linked initiative, the DLI scheme of the Ministry of Information Technology in India, a semiconductor company can get a bunch of grants at this stage, which is pretty sizable compared to the size of their seed or their Series A rounds themselves. But in India, at least at this point, that is the exception. There are grants available for early research, but not necessarily grants available for the commercialization. While we do hope that more of that comes in place, what does exist and what can exist even more is the kind of other funding that kicks in once you have a ready to replicate model, and that is debt. And I think that's what I mean by onwards. So Series B, in many companies, Series B rounds are already starting to become a mix of debt and equity. Off Grid started in, I think, 2019 by two PhDs at IIT Kanpur, and they both, one of them during their PhD, one of them during their postdoc, they overlapped, and they were working on, I think, biofuels at some point in time. And then while doing research, they discovered a new solvent that, and then they kind of serendipitously figured out that this works for zinc-based batteries. So this was back in, let's say, 2016, 17, where, you know, they were doing science, they were both being paid to do science for their respective degrees, and they found something out. So definitely at that point, it's not even on the TRL scale. At the moment when they discovered that this can be used for a zinc-based battery, and when they kind of did the first set of tests, that was TRL 1, 2 at, let's say, 2018, 2019. And it took them about 2 years to in IIT Kanpur, with just incubation and a bit of grants. I think they got one of the grants from the Department of Biotechnology to get to, let's say, TRL3 or TRL4, where I remember I was not part of the Ankur team when we invested, but it's a pretty famous story that when we invested, they could basically light up a bulb. And that's, but they were able to show us a lot of other technical metrics that showed that their battery chemistry had the potential to do the things like I described: abundant materials, 7,000 cycles of life, very high round trip efficiency, and so on. At that point, they were lucky, or they were actually quite proactive in engaging with energy companies. So at that point, they also engaged with Shell, and this was again 2020, 2021. Shell liked their zinc based battery chemistry a lot and uh, decided to do some tests. And when those test results came back, that was when we also felt the confidence to invest. And at that point, that is late 2021, uh, is when we invested, and that was their seed round. And they did kind of tick these boxes. So they had a product, uh, barely speaking. In the lab, they had a product prototype, and they had conversations with Shell to do a pilot. And to us, that was the most confidence inducing aspect, that while we don't understand the tech too much, we understand that Shell does their due diligence. We understand they do their research. So if a company like Shell is interested to come in and to do a pilot with these guys and to pay for it, that was enough credibility for us. So that's where we invested, at that TRL 4-5 stage, where the science was mostly de-risked. There was a little bit of kind of electrolyte tuning to do, some additives to be added. They were using some type of carbon, but they needed to use activated carbon to make the performance a little better. And post investment, they were definitely here. So they had a bit of not a setback, but they just had delays in finding money. So they had customers who were interested, but they needed to set up their first manufacturing plant. And for them, because it was a new type of battery rather than improvement on a existing battery chemistry, it's they have to set up what's called a first of a kind plant. A first of a kind plant has more risks. People are not so happy to finance it. Like I said, some of the tooling may not exist. So a lot of the time here went into finding the money for the Series A, developing some of the tooling, and then doing a lot of trips to China and Europe to secure your supply chain. So you make sure you have access to the materials you need, and to find and to place orders for the tooling. So that's where this the company is at. 3.5 years since we invested, they've moved from TRL 4 to about 7. They're setting up the plant now as we speak, and they will soon be moving to rolling out the first batteries, and then looking at the next plant going forward. That's one example of the company. So far, the company, like I said, got grants. They've raised a seed round from us. They raised a Series A round from us and another lead investor, both purely equity. We're hoping that the next round can unlock some debt for them as they scale up a plant that's kind of been demonstrated, at least to some extent. I think it's hard for deep tech startups to raise money. So if they can, we're very happy for them to raise whatever money they can post us investing. But typically, we do talk to them a few months before the fundraise process formally starts, and we say, how much do you need? Can we help with accessing the right people? There are some investors who may come in with terms that are not great for the company for the long term. So in certain cases, we advise companies to do it this way, that way. But yeah, we don't kind of put controls around it. The thing with equity funding is that you can't dilute the company too much. Every investor at a certain stage expects, let's say, the promoters to have a certain amount of shareholding that even we do. There is a way to kind of structure the cap table. So if you dilute the company too much too early, investors feel that the incentives are not aligned for everyone, and it gets harder to raise subsequent money. So that is one thing we guard against. But I think at this point in time in India, I think the challenge is definitely the reverse, that they're just not able to raise the Series A or the next round of funding. It goes back to what I said, where there's no revenue. A lot of investors are saying, how can I invest 100 crores in a company that actually doesn't have revenue? And it does sound a little crazy, but I think you need people to believe until the very end that that promise will kick in later. So I think for us, pilots, IP, and order book are pretty important milestones. So like I just spent time on off grid. Uh, for us, the pilot with Shell and the conversation with Shell was a very big milestone that obviously got us to invest. Now, the successful running of the pilot and the running of the next pilot was what got their next funding round to happen, because they were able to show that my batteries lasted for this long. I've run my batteries in these conditions, those conditions for this much time. So that was the milestone for them. Now, again, I'll caveat this by saying it's different for different types of companies. So we have a company called Denome in our portfolio that's making a new type of diagnostic test to replace PCR. So for them, when we came in, again, we came in for the science. The subsequent milestones are tied very closely to clinical trials. So how much do you pass through the clinical trial process defines your ability or your right to ask for more money. Uh, so from that perspective, the milestones, I would say, are divided into technical specs, pilots and customer orders, and patents and regulation. And for each company, we kind of have to define it in a different way. I think it would, like, usually we are just talking about a risk and a reward. Um, if there is a way, so obviously, kind of the reward side, the upside is not as high if the disease is rarer. But if it is, so that does make it a little less attractive for us, because in the end we are a financial investor. But if there is a way to de-risk that journey a little more, to increase the chances of that happening, then I think it would work. Um, and sometimes these things do have knockoff effects. So the base technology, while it may be originally designed for a certain disease or a certain rare condition, eventually it may end up becoming commercialized for something very different that might be larger. And we also try to open ourselves to these serendipitous moments that if we think the technology is strong, it will probably find it's application areas that might surprise us. Yeah, I would say those are the challenges. Usually what is interesting is that the competition for some of these deep science tech companies is not as high. So if you take, if I take a company like Agnikul, again from IITM, there are not that many rocketry startups in the world. Especially if I compare it to, let's say, like a food delivery app where there will be five just in one pin code of Bangalore. The problem is much harder, but the competition is also not as high. These are obviously related to each other, and it means that you have a bit more leeway in terms of timelines of when you want to achieve this. So while the challenges are harder, I think our belief at least is that you can kind of, quote unquote, build in a corner for some time and then come back into the market. We can come back to this later as well. I just have a little more to talk about in terms of some of our learnings, what do we look for, and so on. I think all of these things are tied together. In the end, the journey is what unifies things for us. It and what we want, what we look for, what is our expected outcome, all of that, it ties back into this. So what do we like to see in deep science tech startups? uh, I'm not talking about like maybe the basic things which you want to see in any startup, which is that the team should be good, the timing should be right, and so on. One of the very important things that we like to see, and which are actually a feature of deep science startups, is to have a deep moat and to have a lot of defensibility in your technology. So like, this is kind of related to what I just said, where if you have a technology that's very differentiated, so if you have a new diagnostic technique or a new vaccine or a new battery chemistry, it's going to be hard to replicate. You're going to, it's going to be hard to replicate because a lot of years of effort have gone into it from very smart people. A lot of resources have gone into it, and you can protect that with IP by keeping some knowledge secret and so on. So these technologies are relatively easy to defend, and especially in India to a lesser extent, in other countries to a larger extent, you can you can defend your ground using patents a lot better. That's something that we're really interested in, and you will find that as a hallmark in all the companies that we've invested in, that there should be a way to defend your technology better. So sometimes, one of the places where this comes through is we've seen a lot of companies that have process innovation. So they have created, let's say, a new graphene product or a new type of coating, or some sort of new, even let's say a bioplastic from existing materials. And it's an impressive product, it's an impressive technology. But what is special is the ingredients they've used and the ratios they've used to do it, as well as the kind of like the steps in which they've done that. Now, that kind of compositional and process IP or process and compositional patent is pretty hard to defend. Uh, in a that kind of patent is difficult because you have to reveal actually a lot more. So you end up just keeping it as an institutional secret, and that is harder to keep secret as you scale. So in those cases, we feel a process differentiation is possibly not as defensible as an entirely new product that you're able to protect much more strongly with a patent. So that's a key thing that we look for. We look for a deep moat and therefore good defensibility. We also look for large markets. Now, this is a I would say this is a knockoff effect. Usually, most deep tech startups we talk to, market size is never a concern because, for example, energy storage or batteries, 100 billion plus, synthetic biology is again 100 billion plus, just molecular diagnostics within that is about 40 billion. So whenever a company is attacking some of these large markets, market size is not a concern, and therefore I would say that large market sizes is more of a feature for deep science ventures rather than a challenge. What is super important is in the team the combination of both technical and commercial leadership, and I think this is possibly the rarest thing that we see in Indian ecosystem among the four. And we see, and I think there's a lot of things we can take as inspirations from other, I guess, deep tech hubs in the world, where there are people who are very good at doing the commercialization part of it. So if you take IIT Madras as an example, as like a hotbed for deep tech innovation, there are a lot of scientists, whether it's professors, PhD students, postdocs, even people like you, who are creating cutting edge technology. And that cutting edge technology does tick boxes. It can be highly defensible, it can target a large market, and I'll talk about the last bit again, but it can be a long term staying power technology. But that technology is not going to take off in a rapid way until or unless the right business people come into the company. And therefore, we like to see startups where the founding team has thought about that, where the CTO or the chief scientist is not just is not the only one calling shots, is not the only one leading the trajectory of the company, but they've thought about the right capabilities that they need to build to get this technology to commercialize. And to us, that's not very common, and therefore that's something that we also really prioritize. And if I go back to some of our examples in from our portfolio companies, which I'll do in a bit, you'll see that we really had that. We've really looked for that in the portfolio companies that we have. The last is technology should have some staying power. So even if you're starting to develop the technology today, it's going to take a couple of years, like I said, to get to point TRL 3, 4, 5, 6. The technology should be strong enough that even if your product development is delayed, let's say by a year or 2 years, it should still be relevant. Now, this is not really the case with a lot of the semiconductor or AI developments that have been going on of late, where the carpet is pulled under your feet every 1 year, every 2 years. But in cases like synthetic biology, in battery chemistries, particularly the alternatives to lithium, we have found that this is the case. That even if a technology is commercialized 5 years from today, it is still going to have a good chance in the market. Finally, just one slide, but this is more of a freewheeling thing where I'll talk about some of the learnings we've had from some of our portfolio companies and how we are using that to inform ourselves going forward. So just flashing the portfolio slide again. So one is that and it feels fitting to say that here at IITM, that world-class science and world-leading science is being developed in India. There is no doubt about that, and that is across the board. So we're talking about biotechnology, we're talking about semiconductors, silicon photonics, we're talking about new materials, new ceramics, new batteries, new renewable energy generation storage technologies, and there is no shortage of that in institutes in India. It is a bit concentrated in the tier one institutes, and I think that's kind of expected with the kind of focus that's gone into it. And while we want to see more coming in from a more diverse set of educational institutes and research organizations, the fact is the quantity and the quality here is quite good. I don't think this is a concern for anyone in the space. Organizations like ICSR are doing their part in maybe making more translational research happen, and we've seen a lot of the science talent been used in consulting for industries in the last 10, 20 years, particularly even at IITM. As I was a student here, I know that profs spent a lot of time consulting with industries, and that was pretty lucrative for them. So I don't blame them for doing it, but not necessarily having the thought process to found a startup, and that is changing. And I think it should change further. We found rare, tech and business teams to do to really propel deep tech startups forward. Um, the experiences we've had in our companies where we've had this combination has really convinced us that this needs to exist in the companies that we invest in. And I'll give a couple of examples in a minute. But the other thing is, how do we make this happen in a better way? And I think courses like this are a great platform to make that happen. Like I said, I don't think the PhDs or the scientists supply is the issue. I think the problem is people are in silos and people aren't necessarily talking to each other. How does a scientist find a CEO or find somebody who's going to help them with business development, with strategy, with customer conversations, supply chain, and so on? And further to that, there is, I think, a sense of how do you play out your venture for the long run. Something that we always joke about internally is sometimes we talk to a founder who's more technically minded, sometimes even a full-time professor, and they say, look, I want to hold the stake in my company. I'm not really comfortable giving 10% or 15% to somebody who can lead this business or strategy for the company. And something we always joke about is, would you rather own 100% of $0 or 10% of $100 million? And that is really the key question here, that sometimes you have to think of the equity in your company as a resource that you use to bring VCs on board, that you use to bring money on board, that you use to bring people on board. And I think that thought process isn't really there. When it's there, when the combination of the PhDs or the science and the business people have come together to form a team, when they've recognized that equity is a great asset to use, when they've recognized that the only way to be relevant and to grow for a long period of time is to keep thinking about the outside world, is to keep is to keep a good structure of the company, is to keep the incentives aligned. That has been super important. And in particular, two of our companies, I mentioned Offgrid quite a bit, as well as String, they have had such teams where we've also felt very confident interacting with them, because they are the business and the tech side of things are in lockstep. So for example, in Offgrid, like I said, there are two PhDs, but there are also two other co-founders, one of whom is a CFO, the other is a chief commercialization officer of sorts for the company. He's he's talking to customers, he's talking to investors, and he's not a battery chemist, he's not a scientist. He worked in Microsoft for 15 years, so he's not anywhere close to deep tech or to batteries. But because he's led P&Ls at Microsoft, where he's always thinking about business outcomes, he pushes the technical co-founders to think about what to think about the commercialization of the product, and not just, hey, if I spend another 2 weeks, I can increase the energy density by 2%. Hey, I want to do this kind of tweaking. While that is good and intellectually stimulating for sure, I think the combination of the teams is what's important to both to keep on track in the short term as well as keep on track in the long term. So that's something that's been super important. And I think there have been some new initiatives in some institutes to make this happen in a better way. I know IIT Bombay has something called Project Titanium, where they're kind of interfacing with the profs and the technology transfer office, and they're also interfacing with other IITB alumni and others who have been entrepreneurs in the past, not necessarily in science-based ventures, and trying to do the matchmaking between them. So trying to see if they can make those teams happen. The reason I said there are other ecosystems globally that do this maybe a little better is because in the US you will see, and perhaps in Canada as well, you will see a lot of kind of repeat entrepreneurs who find profs, say, hey, you have a good technology, let's commercialize this, let's spend 5 7 years, maybe we can sell it to somebody, maybe we can do something about it, and once that's done, they're out and they're looking for the next thing to do. So that's almost a career of just flipping technologies into large companies and repeating. Those kinds of people have invaluable experience because they know how to sell. Their primary job is to extract value out of this valuable scientific resource. And I think we need more people who have that line of thinking. Maybe we'll do it in a different way, but we need those people to exist and those people to talk to the scientists. Lastly, we have been always quite surprised when new application areas come up. So like I said, Off-Grid talked about fast charging, then they talked about e-rickshaws, then they talked about stationary storage. Similarly, if I go back to String, so if I just go back to the previous slide, String is one of our oldest deep science investments. They're a synthetic biology company. Again, they have a PhD and they have somebody who heads the business as the core founding team. In so their platform is engineered bacteria that can basically take up methane. So their first product and what they raised the majority of their money to do is to set up plants next to oil and gas refineries where methane is emitted pretty much without any capture, and to capture some of that methane and to kind of at least capture it and perhaps even to upcycle it. So String found a way to upcycle that methane into single cell proteins that they could then sell to the agricultural industry. In the end, we were excited. The technology was very good. However, in the end, you're selling a commodity product. You're selling livestock feed. What they discovered, which we had no idea of when we invested into them, is that they could take their bacteria, convert it into a biostimulant, which when inoculated into rice fields can reduce rice fields methane emissions by about 50%. This was nowhere in the picture when we came in. We just knew the technology was quite strong, and this is a much better technology or a much better product for them commercially because it is a specialty chemical. It's it's a low volume, high margin product, and it requires much less integration with each plant that you need to set up with. This is easily productized, and we've been super surprised, obviously very happy by the new product that's come up, and therefore for us, that, like I said, opening ourselves to these kind of serendipitous or surprising new developments is very important. And when the other bases are in place, things like uh, strong team, large market, defensible technology, it does give you the cushion to go after new things. We've seen that with almost all of these companies where new use cases have come through. So, Vimano is one of our most recent investees. We invested just 3 months ago. They're based in Bangalore. They make membranes for fuel cells and flow batteries. We found out that they even though their focus is on ion conductive membranes, they've sold membranes to ISRO for thermal management. Why? Because ISRO wanted membranes made in India. Nobody else was able to make it. And not only are these guys having a strong product, but they also have membrane processing capability that nobody else has. Again, good validation for us. New market opened up when needed, and definitely a surprise. So when the other boxes are ticked, I think we do have the potential for new application areas to pop up. And uh, and I'm not sure I mentioned it earlier, but one of the key things for that is for the technology itself to be a platform technology. So that's what enables one core tech to spin off multiple products.